Well, buying secondhand is becoming second nature for many as the trend for vintage clothes grows.
Tomorrow, more than 100 vintage dealers will be featured at the Time Travelers Vintage Expo at the Tulsa State Fairgrounds, including an Oklahoma City woman who turned her passion for things of the past into a business.
From a cozy spot in her living room,
triple stitch through there.
Megan Hines is sewing up a tear in an old pair of army pants.
I get very, very into it. It's like time is nothing whenever I do this.
She's a self-taught seamstress who's turned a respect for all things retro into a side business of buying and reselling vintage clothing.
The handmade pieces are the ones that I look for, honestly. Patterns, color, obviously. I mean, the colors alone, I love crazy. The crazier, the better.
She has an entire room dedicated to vintage clothes. They span across at least 9 decades, with many requiring some special TLC.
It's fascinating watching a piece transform and bringing the colors back, or fixing a huge rip that people would throw away that stuff like, oh, I can't fix it. It's like, you can though. They're so fragile. So it's a whole other beast, loving vintage versus like really loving vintage and preserving them.
Her love for vintage and flair for style comes from her grandmother.
I'd always went through my grandma's closet and sort of touched all of her clothes and like put on her jewelry growing up. This one is super special.
Megan actually started out selling some clothes for her grandma 8 years ago, then created Retro Blonde Vintage for herself a year later, selling online and in some Oklahoma City shops. Of course, she likes to test out the pieces and keep some when she can.
I said, I will put it on, and I'm like, dang it, it fits. So then I have to do a spin in it, and I have to wear it once, and then I will recycle it, and I'll wash it, clean it, mend it, and then send it on its way and resell it.
On Saturday, she's taking her shop on the road, headed to Tulsa for the Time Travelers Vintage Expo at the fairgrounds.
This will be the first time that people actually get to see it, and it'd be for sale. I am pulling all my unicorns out, which I have kept for many years because they're so immaculate and so oh my gosh, because they're so beautiful, you just want to keep them.
But her ultimate goal is to encourage recycling and reusing.
Oh yeah.
And to help keep history alive by showing you can take something old,
just the detail, that's just so amazing,
and make it new again.
They need to be worn, they need to be seen, and they need to be loved. Pieces now they're not the same.
All right, here are the details for the Time Travelers Vintage Expo. It's Saturday from 11 to 6 at Central Park Hall. That's at the Tulsa State Fairgrounds. Again, tickets are $11. Children 12 and under are free. And interesting story, I met Megan back in February through Instagram. She had gone to my grandmother's estate sale, and you might remember I shared a story about that, and she had so many clothes from the 20s all the way up until, the 90s pretty much. And so Megan bought, I think she said 100+ pieces from my grandma's.
So some of those pieces that we saw?
The majority of the pieces, especially in that living room area, were from my grandma's. A lot of them were my mom's clothes. Some of them were my great-grandmother's clothes from the 20s. And so Megan reached out and she's kind of showed me the process of hemming some of the things, fixing patches, zippers, things like that, soaking them. She soaks a lot of the items. She hand washes everything. She will not put any vintage. No, she said they'll just, and she watches them very closely. In the bathtub is where she soaks them because they might disintegrate.
Right. Yeah, they're so fragile. And some of that material, very, very old.
Well, then you saw her grandmother was just like a movie star. And she's still living, and Megan says she's just as fabulous today as she was then.
Love it. Great story.